Long before the world called him a hero, José Navarro was simply a farmer's son in the hills of Luzon, Philippines. His earliest memories were not of war, but of patient mornings, lifting his bare feet through the dew-soaked rice paddies, following his father's steady voice as they checked the irrigation channels and guessed the coming weather by scent and cloud. For generations, his family had tilled this land. In every sun-bleached furrow, José saw the invisible threads that bound him to his ancestors, to the water, to the rocky soil, and to every leaf that grew from it. But seasons changed. When the Japanese descended upon the islands, the ancient rhythms of planting and harvest fractured. Soldiers now patrolled the trails José once used to chase dragonflies, and fields meant for rice became muddy trenches, cut with wire and fear. Still, through this turmoil, he clung to his father's lesson: the earth never hides from the one who listens. Years of farm life had prepared José with a quiet vigilance, the ability to interpret the jungle's stories without a word. Where a stranger saw a wall of green, José noted the subtle break in the brush where deer had crept. He read the soil for the weight of footsteps, the slant of grass for wind and rain, the silence of birds for trouble. While others learned to fight with bullets and steel, José learned patience, intuition, and movement quieter than shadow. The war brought American soldiers to his village in a swirl of uniforms and foreign voices. Their leader, Lieutenant James Carter, was from Chicago, a man more at home on city sidewalks than dirt trails. He asked José for help guiding a small patrol through the hills. Their mission was crucial. They needed to reach a mountain pass before the Japanese advanced, or risk losing the entire northern route to the enemy. José agreed, quietly setting out at dawn with the Americans. The first signs of danger were familiar. A trail gone silent, animal tracks that ended abruptly, a faint scent of oil and sweat in the shade. He slowed the patrol, signaling them to crouch low and move in single file. Carter hesitated, but José's urgency was unmistakable. As they approached a narrow, vine-choked ravine, shots shattered the morning air. The Japanese, hidden in ridges above, had set a perfect trap. The patrol dove for what little cover they could find, pinned down by a rain of bullets and splinters. José felt his heart pounding, but held fast to what he knew. The land itself was speaking, offering escape to those who knew where to look. He motioned for Carter to follow him, crawling under dense ferns, toward a dry streambed invisible to their attackers. José's instinct guided their movements. He craned his ear to the sounds above, counting pauses in gunfire to signal each short dash to safety. He found a rotting log bridging the stream, a secret tunnel of sorts, only big enough for one at a time. The Americans hesitated, but trust was the only thing sharper than their fear. One by one, the patrol slipped through the hidden path, emerging beyond sight of the ambush. The entire time, José listened for the rhythm of the fight, all the cues the land provided. When Carter finally caught his breath, eyes wide with disbelief, he realized what every survivor would remember. It was not guns or grenades that saved them, but the intuition born from turning soil, watching weather, and learning the jungle's speech. Safe at last, Carter asked, "How did you know?" José shook his head. "A farmer sees what soldiers can't. The ground always tells you where to go, if you listen." That day, the story of a patrol saved by a local's rural wisdom spread quietly through Allied lines. Few would ever understand how the patterns of a rice paddy, the turns, the patience, the silent watch, could become the pattern for survival. But among those Americans, and for José Navarro himself, it was clear: when history's storms came, it was the roots laid in peace that held firm while the world was on fire. The Americans never forgot that first morning in the jungle, nor the farmer's instinct that had saved them from a trap. For Lieutenant Carter and his men, their faith in José Navarro grew into dependence. Each patrol now began with a quiet request for his guidance. Every step forward weighed against the lessons he offered in silence. José's life transformed too. Where once he measured his days by harvests and rainfall, now hours were counted by safe crossings and salvaged lives. Yet even as war pressed closer, José remained a farmer at heart. His hands were steady because they remembered gentleness, and his eyes were keen because they had learned to watch for what others missed. That week, a new challenge appeared. Japanese forces were closing in, using thick jungle to mask their own advance. Intelligence from local guerrilla networks suggested an impending attack on the Allied encampment. The Americans had the weapons, but the land belonged to the invaders and the natives, not the military maps. José, standing before Carter, made a plan that drew not on tactics, but on the memory of planting seasons and animal migrations. First, he pointed out a series of shallow sinkholes hidden by wild ginger and palms, perfect natural bunkers overlooked in earlier scouting. He helped the sergeant move heavy equipment through a ravine that tracked an ancient boar trail, creating an impromptu supply line invisible from above. He taught the troops to recognize warning signs: trees with broken branches signaling hidden foot traffic, the absence of birds predicting human intrusion, even the way dew drained from leaves betraying a recent march by outsiders. When the Japanese attack came, swift and merciless, the camp was ready. Thanks to José's direction, the Americans held firm, repelling the assault from superior shelter, cutting off enemy supply runs by predicting their route through the valley. In the chaos, José moved always at the edges, passing quick signals through the brush, guiding medics to the wounded and leading small squads through escape paths in the trees. In one tense moment, American forces nearly found themselves encircled. José urged the commander to trust the river's curve, leading a desperate retreat over slippery stones and back into the hidden gully where he had once fished for carp with his brother. What was a secret of sustenance in peacetime now became a path to life in war. After victory, Carter tried to thank José publicly. "Your instinct," he said before the gathered troop, "is more than skill. It's wisdom passed through generations. You taught us to see, not just to fight." José simply nodded. He did not crave medals or speeches, only to see the land and those who respected it endure. From then on, American patrols sought out local guidance, and even the most hardened soldiers learned to listen for the small truths of the jungle, the lay of roots, the hush before rain, the quiet footsteps of survival. With each day, José found that the lessons sown in peacetime fields had become seeds of hope in soil churned by war. Victory did not breed comfort, only deeper vigilance. For José Navarro and the Allied soldiers who depended on his insight, survival in the Luzon jungle was a daily negotiation, not just with the enemy, but with the land itself. Each morning, the jungle revealed new puzzles: tracks erased by sudden rainfall, routes twisted by flash floods, and quiet glades suddenly thrumming with distant artillery. Lieutenant Carter came to rely on José's ability to read these signs like a language. Wordlessly, José moved through undergrowth as if brushing aside the pages of an unread book. He taught the Americans to kneel in the dark before sunrise and listen, not for voices, but for interruptions in the insect chorus, for the far-off thud of a disrupted route, for silence punctuated by alarm. The men learned that a frightened monkey's call could warn of an enemy patrol long before enemy boots came into sight. As the campaign intensified, the troop received orders to secure a vital crossroads deep within enemy-held territory. The mission was perilous. The approach was a maze of thorn thickets and treacherous slopes, haunted by snipers who faded into the shadows before a countershot could be fired. The Americans, trained to trust maps and coordinates, quickly found their expertise outmatched by the stubborn unpredictability of the land. Rain turned trails into rivers, and fog rendered vision useless. Here, José's presence was more valuable than any compass. Knowing the enemy watched the obvious routes, José traced the less-traveled songlines of jungle animals, following the paths foraged nightly by wild pigs and small deer. Knowing those never ran too close to human camps. He directed nighttime advances, timed to the rise of frog song, guiding the troop past Japanese scouts distracted by their own perimeter alarms reset after decades of predatory cats, not men. Carter watched in amazement as Jose predicted enemy actions by noting crushed orchids, a sudden absence of frog calls, and the subtly rearranged rocks at streams. One night, guided only by the intermittent glow of fireflies, they skirted a Japanese outpost without a sound, every man placing their boots in the exact steps Jose traced. Their luck was tested hardest during a ferocious monsoon that swept down from the mountains, turning valleys to lakes and severing the connection with the main Allied force. Isolated and running low on supplies, the troop huddled in the shelter of a great banyan tree. Morale wavered as thunder shook the ground and fear seeped into every whispered conversation. Panic almost took hold when a soldier spotted movement in the shadowy downpour. Japanese scouts sweeping for survivors. Jose motioned everyone to stillness. Through the howling wind, he focused on the rhythm of drips off leaves, the muted scurry of a rat. Moving only when lightning split the sky, masking sound and shadow, he led the men across slick boulders and into a hollow veiled by gnarled roots. All night they waited, including Jose, who had never before felt so responsible for lives not his own. When dawn broke and the rain relented, the patrol was intact and undiscovered. Carter, moved by what he now considered more miracle than luck, shook Jose's hand. "You know this earth like you're part of it," he said. "How do you do it?" Jose smiled tiredly. "The land has saved us all, long before any of us carried rifles. Maybe it remembers." That day, Allied headquarters credited the entire troop for the mission's success, but within the ranks, Carter and his men exchanged knowing glances. They celebrated with rice and sweet tea, honoring not only their own endurance, but the gentle authority of a farmer's wisdom that had, just for a moment, bent the unforgiving jungle to mercy. In the hush of that evening, as stars finally pierced the clouds, Jose looked out over the fields beyond the carnage. He pressed his palm to a tree trunk, silently thanking the land for its guidance. War had made him a stranger to his old life, but in every step, every lesson he translated for the soldiers, he found a way back. Proof that in even this darkest hour, the farmer's instinct could shine its humble light. The rains eventually faded, and the war pressed relentlessly on, each day drawing the Allied troops deeper into territory where the trees were older than the stories they held. Jose Navarro's reputation now preceded him. American soldiers, Filipino guerrillas, and even weary local villagers recognized in his quiet confidence a lifeline that reached beyond bullets and strategy. Morale, however, was not so easily sustained. The troop grew thin, fatigue battered them as much as enemy fire. Men longed for news from home and for a path that led anywhere but forward into the unknown. It was in those longest watches of the night, when fears crowded together like the tangled roots underfoot, that Jose found himself most tested. Carter confided his doubts, admitting he was not sure if courage or luck kept them moving. Jose listened, sharing stories from his childhood. How every harvest lost taught patience, how every animal caught depended on respect, not power. As the campaign approached a critical turning point, word circulated. The Japanese planned to use a wide sweep through the southern valleys to isolate and destroy the Allied advance, leaving little room for escape. The geography was treacherous. Dense thickets hid snipers, ravines could swallow trucks whole, and ancient trails, once mapped by farmers for commerce, now threatened to turn into death traps. Carter called his battered men together, outlining a risky plan. With only hours before the sweep, they would need to break through the enemy line at dawn and reach a remote plateau, high ground where reinforcements might join or extraction could be attempted. The proposed route was a Hail Mary, dangerous and untested, except in the faint memory of old village traders. Carter turned to Jose. "What do you see?" Jose closed his eyes and let instinct and memory seep through. He pictured the lay of slopes, the watercourses after rain, the winding game paths he'd run as a child, with siblings trailing behind. "There is a way," he whispered, "but it's thin as needle's thread." At first light, the troop slipped silently down into the valley, trusting José's step-by-step guidance. They moved as José instructed, touching tree trunks along bends, pausing in thickets to listen for unnatural stillness, wading through riverbeds where birds fluttered nervously overhead, a sign, José explained, that nothing yet disturbed their wild home. Gunfire erupted as Japanese scouts realized their escape. José's plan depended as much on timing as on terrain. The men had to cross a series of exposed ridges precisely as the morning fog thickened, giving them the precious seconds required to scatter and regroup beyond the enemy's vision. Carter nearly lost hope as bullets cracked through mist, but José pressed on, drawing on lessons from years hiding from monsoon storms under banana leaves and chasing wild boar through the fog. One soldier stumbled and fell, wounded. José refused to leave him behind, calling for 2 men to loop back, even as Carter pleaded that time was running out. The escape now swung on a razor's edge between mercy and necessity. In the end, the troop burst onto the plateau, battered and breathless, but intact save for a few minor wounds. From their vantage, Carter radioed Allied command for support. Reinforcements soon secured the ground and began a counterattack that would mark a turning point in the Luzon campaign. Lives had been saved not by force but by trust in a farmer's instincts, a wisdom rooted in patience, in the memory of wind and soil, and in the refusal to abandon any man to the jungle's mercy. As dusk fell over the plateau, the battered troop shared a quiet meal, rice and river fish, boiled simply as José had once prepared for his family. Carter raised his tin cup, to lessons given, lives reclaimed, and the silence that saves. José leaned against a tree, watching the fields below return to shadow, reminded that every sacrifice dug deep into the soul. Still, he believed, in every war and in every peace, the land itself remembered and waited, offering those who listened a chance to survive another night. Dawn crept slowly over Luzon after the battle at the plateau, its golden light melting away the haze of war, just as it called rice seedlings from wet earth. For José Navarro, the hours of violence had given way once more to silence, the kind only known to those who have both survived and protected others with more than strength alone. He sat apart from the troops for a moment, legs crossed among wild ginger and fallen leaves, touching the soil as if asking it for permission to begin again. Word spread throughout the region that the Japanese advance had been halted, the plateau secured through the bravery of Allied troops and the farmers' wisdom that had been their compass. For the first time in months, hope budded in the hearts of villagers. The invaders, once unstoppable, had been turned back by knowledge sown generations before they ever set foot on the island. News of José's deeds reached American command. Officers sought him out, eager to learn how one unassuming man could anticipate the enemy, save wounded soldiers, and turn the land's every whisper into a tactical advantage. José answered their questions with humility, always directing praise to the land, to his father, and to the community that had shaped him. When a general asked how many battles he had won, José simply replied, "I only tried to make sure we could all return home." As the campaign pushed forward and months finally yielded to the promise of Allied victory, José was asked to guide one last crucial mission, ushering a large group of displaced villagers and refugees through the labyrinthine fields and forest back to safety. The journey reminded him more of peacetime than war, moving quietly at dawn, using hidden irrigation trenches as cover, signaling directions with stones and leaves rather than radios and weaponry. Along the way, he tended the injured, consoled the fearful, and taught passing Allied scouts to pause and read the wind or watch bird flight for signs of danger. At each bend in the path, he saw children wide-eyed with fear, mothers clutching what little they'd managed to gather, and old men offering silent prayers. More than once, José thought back to his own boyhood, his mother's gentle chiding to wash up before dinner, his father's stories beneath the mango tree, the soft warmth of an uneventful dusk. Every family deserved to feel that way again, he thought, and every lesson learned in hardship was a seed for peace. Weeks later, when flags of liberation were raised above the battered villages of Luzon, José returned to his old home. The fields were scarred but not broken. He rebuilt the terraces with other survivors, working the mud with bare hands and grateful heart. Neighbors who had followed his lead in fear now approached him with respect, asking for wisdom on new plantings and water channels. "The land is patient," José told them. "If we care for it, it will heal, and so will we." The war's end brought ceremonies and medals, but José often slipped away from speeches to restore a fence or help clear irrigation. He cherished the laughter of children returned to the fields instead of hiding in caves. Occasionally, American veterans returned, seeking out the guide whose quiet courage had changed their fate. They shared stories beneath trees grown tall, their voices fading into the dusk like a final salute. Later in life, as new generations learned of the war through books and storytellers, José's tale remained more than a legend. It became a lesson. Schools and villages honored him not as a warrior, but as a teacher. The farmer whose patience, respect for the land, and unassuming wisdom preserved lives when hope itself was in retreat. José often watched the stars in those peaceful years, recalling both the darkness he had seen and the light that returned. "Valor," he would tell anyone who asked, "is found in listening, in guiding gently, and in carrying your people home, even through fire." In the end, the war became a chapter in the island's long story, but the fields endured, and so did the farmer's instinct that had, against all odds, saved them all.